Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma virvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasavi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So Śrī Tattva-sutra, we have a summary. Well, it's a pre-summary of topics 2 and 3. What do you call that? Introduction. Introduction 2 and 3. The nature of the soul and material energy, chit and achit, and their relation to Brahman. Mantra 14 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. One should know perfectly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and his transcendental name, form, qualities, and pastimes, as well as the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men, and animals. When one knows these, he surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it. And in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge. So ephemeral means lasting a very short time. So this cosmic manifestation, which compared to our lifetime lasts quite a very long time, it's actually just a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things. In the purport to Mantra 4, it is said, perfect knowledge means knowing the Lord in all his features, knowing his potencies, and knowing how these potencies work by his will. The Lord cannot be known by mental speculation. One should try to learn of the transcendence from the Lord himself, the supreme source of the Vedas, for the Lord alone has full knowledge of transcendence. So, the beginning of that, perfect knowledge means knowing the Lord in all his features, right? So, not just understanding some aspect of Krishna, but all of his different features, because that's part of his personality, why he expands in different ways. Then, knowing his potencies, so knowing the Lord in all of his features, knowing his potencies come in the form of all of these different opulences, anything that we find attractive, and knowing how these potencies work by his will, right? So seeing them in proper connection, not through our own eyes, but through the eyes of the Vedas. In the purport to Mantra 1, it is stated, the Lord's proprietorship over everything within the universe is confirmed in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verses 4 and 5, where para and apara prakriti are discussed. The elements of nature, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego, all belong to the Lord's inferior material energy, apara prakriti, whereas the living being, the organic energy, is his superior energy, para prakriti. Both of these prakritis or energies are emanations from the Lord, and ultimately, he is the controller of everything that exists. There is nothing in the universe that does not belong to either the para or the apara prakriti. Therefore, everything is the property of the Supreme Being. Right? Because the Supreme Being, the absolute personality of Godhead, is the complete person, he has complete and perfect intelligence to adjust everything by means of his different potencies. The Supreme Being is often compared to a fire and everything organic and inorganic is compared to the heat and light of that fire, right? The products of the fire. They can't be separated. Just as fire distributes energy in the form of heat and light, the Lord displays his energies in different ways. Thus, he remains the ultimate controller, sustainer, and dictator of everything. He is the possessor of all potencies, the knower of everything, and the benefactor of everyone. He is full of inconceivable opulence, power, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. In purport to Mantra 14 is stated, Lord Vishnu, the personality of Godhead, possesses different energies known as para, superior, and apara, inferior. The living entities belong to the superior energy, right? And this is why when we hear people come up with this excuse that, no, it's not my fault that I'm suffering, it's Maya, or it's not my fault that I can't become a pure devotee, it's Maya. Maya's always tested me. We want to blame it on her. But what we're not understanding there is that the reason that we're under the control of the inferior energy is because we exercise our free will in the wrong way. So as soon as we redirect our consciousness, then the Lord's energies all help us instead of, they're always helping us. They're either helping us in an unfavorable way or in a favorable way. So as we misuse our free will, she helps us in an unfavorable way to our devotional service by helping us to forget that we actually have this connection to Krishna. Right? She's only doing her job. But as soon as we redirect our consciousness, then she helps us go back to Krishna. So thinking that a material situation, so set aside the fact that, obviously Maya is not material, but new subject, which also relates here. Sometimes we think that our material situation is preventing us from engaging in devotional service. I can't engage in devotional service. I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough resources, or my house isn't big enough, or I don't have the right kind of car, or whatever the case may be. We come up with these excuses. Once I have this, this, and this, then I can be Krishna conscious. But when we say that, we're implying that dead matter is superior to spirit, because we're spirit. And if we're saying that something material is holding us back, we're taking an inferior position to something that is inferior to us, right? But if we actually understand what our position is, then we understand, okay, no, I'm actually, my nature is actually superior to this thing, so I can't depend on it. It's an improper value that I've assigned to this thing to think that it's actually superior to me. So we have to understand that. And then ideally we understand these at the same time, but once we understand that we're actually belonging to the superior energy, that doesn't mean that we should then try to lord it over because, I'm superior to all of these things, I can use them however I want. No. We have to understand what the energy is actually made for. That's why it's talking about understanding the Lord in all his features and knowing his potencies and knowing how the potencies work by his will, right? So we need to understand how all of these features are actually part of the Lord. We have to understand the different potencies that present themselves in these different features. And then we have to know how they work by his will, not how they work by the way we want them to work, but how they're actually supposed to work. Then Srila Prabhupada continues, the material energy in which we are presently entangled is the inferior energy. The material creation is made possible by this energy, which covers the living entity with ignorance of vidya and induces them to perform fruitive activities. Yet there is another part of the Lord's superior energy that is different from both this material inferior energy and the living entities. That superior energy constitutes the eternal deathless abode of the Lord. In this mantra, 14 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Śrī Īśopaniṣad teaches that one must perfectly know both Sambhuti, the personality of Godhead, and Vinasha, the temporary material manifestation, side by side. By knowing the material manifestation alone, one cannot be saved. For in the course of nature, there is devastation at every moment. Ahanyahani bhutani gacchani yama layam. Nor can one be saved from these devastations by the opening of hospitals. One can be saved only by complete knowledge of the eternal life of bliss and awareness. The whole Vedic scheme is meant to educate men in this art of attaining real life. The nature of the soul and the material energy is summarized in the Dasha Tattva as follows. So, Chit and Achit are going to cover numbers 5 through 8 of the Dasha Mula. Who remembers 1 through 4 of the Dasha Mula? So number 1 is Praman, the authority is the Vedas. And then the other 9 are the Prameyas. So the first Prameya is
the Supreme Lord.
Krishna is the Supreme Absolute Truth, yeah.
And then living entities are subordinate to
that comes a little later. Yeah, so because we're still talking about the Supreme Lord. You're following the 5 topics of the Upanishads there. So Krishna is the Supreme Absolute Truth, and then the rest are about Krishna there. Krishna is omnipotent, and he is the fountainhead of all relationships in love. So then, for Chit and Achit, it's 5 through 8. So 5. The living entities are Krishna's separated parts and parcels. So now we're talking about the living entities. The living entity, due to its constitutional situation as marginal energy, may come under the sway of material energy. 7, again, due to its marginal nature, the living entity in the liberated condition is free from the influence of material nature. And 8, the living entity and everything in this material cosmos is simultaneously one and different from the Supreme Lord Krishna. Okay, so then we will start chapter 2 of Śrī tattva-sutra.
Can I ask this?
Yeah.
To the mantra 14. Just for me, it was my original understanding was that we should know material creation to much detail, like about gathering some material knowledge like this. To what extent we should know these things? Only in general, as tattva, there are some many laws or some structure. Or
so it means whatever our field is, we should be able to understand Krishna in those fields. So it's not that we have to become expert in all material knowledge, because it says that we have to basically learn these 2 things side by side. But whatever we're already dealing with in the material world, we have to deal with it in such a way that we actually understand its true purpose. And so that's what it means by how does it word it? One should know perfectly the Supreme Personality of God, Sri Krishna, is transcendental from the informed life, as well as the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men, and animals. When one knows these, he surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it. Right. Because then, what's the other mantra that's similar to that? Is it 10 or 9? Vidyam cha, vidyam cha.
Yeah, it's
I don't know where I'd find it here. It's somewhere in here. But yeah, the idea is that we have to see these things. We have to see Krishna, because like we said there in the purport to mantra 4, knowing the Lord in all his features, knowing his potencies, and knowing how these opulents work by his will. So whatever's in our field, We have to understand how those are actually working. And example I used to give when I was living in the temple, when I first lived in the temple, I think it was maybe my second or third year living in the temple. And I got a job with a devotee who had a business making awnings. Awnings, they're on the front of buildings. Usually these are for businesses, the ones I've made. So it projects off of the building a little bit. So if it's raining, you could be under it. But then it also has the advertisement on it. It's got the name of the store, sometimes some pictures of whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so I was doing graphic design for this awning company. I was making the lettering, things like that, logos. And prior to getting that job, I never noticed any awnings when I was driving. Never. It wasn't part of my perspective. But when I got that job and I started understanding it, basically I'm designing them all day, so that's all I see. So then when I drive, now I don't really notice them anymore, depending on where I am. But that's all I would see then. I would say, oh, we built that one. Definitely didn't do that one, And also I don't know if I could do it anymore because there's so many more now. I could name fonts just by looking at them on signs. So, oh yeah, that's Edwardian script, that's copper plate bold, that's hobo standard, etc. The standard ones. And so we don't always notice everything. No one does. No one notices everything in the material world. We notice what's in our field, right? So another example I used to give, if you're walking through the woods, you're stepping over all these rocks. For some people, they're just cool obstacles. Like, oh, cool, like I can jump from this one to that one to that one. Another person's going to, not be so excited. They still see them as obstacles, but they're not very excited because now they have to exert extra energy, so they're trying to go around them. Someone else is going to be looking at the composition of the rocks because, oh, this one's sandstone, but this one's granite, and this one has, these big pieces of quartz in it, and so people are going down the same path, but since their fields are different, they're focusing on different aspects of these things. So whatever aspects we are noticing, we are to understand how they are actually just Krishna's potency, and then how to use them properly in Krishna's service. So that's what this means by learning them side by side. Not that, okay, now that I've understood the jumping around part and the, going around part, now I have to know the composition. No, you don't have to know that unless it's your field. If you're, what's it called, a geologist? Is that the rock people? Yeah. If you're a geologist, then then you'll know these things, and then you can figure out. For example, if you are a geologist and that's where your focus is, then you'll know that granite is actually more structurally integral than sandstone. Sandstone over time will erode. So you can understand that Krishna's potency is in that in a different way, but sandstone is easier to shape, right? So you can carve nice shapes very easily in sandstone, and it'll last a very long time, as long as you're alive, basically, and as long as most of your kids are alive. But if you want something that's going to still be here in like 1,000 or so years, you do granite, right? Or if you want higher quality. So all of these, everything that can be in our purview can be understood in terms of Krishna. So that's what this means. Clear enough? Yes.
Also, this is connected to the main principle of bhakti, which is Śrī Īśopaniṣad, this Śāstra-cakṣuṣā, which is Sarvagrim shows here at the other kicker. The first one to know the Lord is the first principle, to always remember Krishna. And the second one, we should never forget the Lord. This is the second element that we should know also that. Side by side, the vidya and avidya. Vidya meaning the material creation, which is not actually avidya, it is also Krishna centered. But most people view it as in an ignorant way, but doesn't mean that it is ignorance. So by understanding what Chandra explained, how it is connected to Krishna, especially the field that we're interested in, this is the prerequisite never to forget Krishna. So side by side, cultivate spiritual taste, and also whenever we are in our job or we do something, we move around the material energy, then we remember that it belongs to Krishna.
There also any connection, because in I think in the 14th chapter somewhere in the report of Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada mentions that we should thoroughly understand the modes of nature, how they work, and then this brings liberation. So this can be also connected to this.
Yeah, because basically if we thoroughly understand the modes of nature, we'll understand how they're influencing us, and then we'll understand how to basically solve that puzzle to escape their influence. You know, through the Shastra and Caru inside it, and of course, chanting. And then so to connect it, what Pandavaji was saying, to connect it to yesterday's discussion, because if we don't see the things in this world as how they are connected to Krishna, the things that we're dealing with, then we won't understand Krishna in his completeness. We'll only understand some aspect of Krishna. And it's important for us in the material world to understand how this material world is actually just made from him and why it was made. We have to understand that compassion, like we were discussing at the end of yesterday's class, because if we don't understand that, then we just have a distaste for the material world, which is good, but it's not a healthy distaste for the material world. It's actually an aversion, right? We don't like it because it doesn't fulfill our desires. That's not a good reason to not accept the material world. When we understand what it is and how actually it was Krishna's compassion that allowed us to misuse our free will in such a terrible way, then we can start appreciating Krishna, who he is as a person, for him to go out of his way to do this for each of us. Who are trying to completely forget about it. Right? So when we see the world in that way, and we can understand, okay, this is Krishna's potency. Because the thing is, we have things that we interact with in this material world. Everybody does. So let's see, there was a verse. I might have it with me. It's in the first canto. I think it's the 5th chapter. It might be the 15th chapter. No, it is the 5th chapter, 1.534. Thus, when all a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which caused his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work. So the very things that are binding us to the world, if we actually see them in the proper way, they actually become instruments of our liberation. It destroys the tree of work. But it only happens when we understand the connection to Krishna. Right? If we try to just ignore those things, right, the things that we have attachments for, the dry renunciation, which we spoke about last week, then the issue is even if we give it up, we're still attached to it in our head, or even if we're averse to it. So detachment is not aversion. Detachment is the absence of attachment, not the opposite of attachment. And so essentially that's what all of these points are bringing us to understand, because the tendency in our material conditioning is, I want you to tell me what the best thing is, and then I want to focus on that, right? Basically, give me the choice and I'll choose one. But it's a bit more complicated, right? Because we're dealing with consciousness here. We're not just dealing with which is the right answer, this one or this one, right? You can't come to the right conclusion until you purify your consciousness. And if your consciousness isn't purified, then you won't see Krishna in this world, right? And if you only see him in the temple, for example, what's that qualification? One who only sees Krishna in the temple and not anywhere else. What do we call that?
Kanishta.
Kanishta. Right, good, thank you. So if that's where our mentality is, and we don't actually see him, these other things, it's a very entry level of understanding. So basically, everything that we all just said explains how to properly understand those verses. Of course, there are those who misinterpret those verses. And, they focus more on the, you have to understand material nature. And, basically they have 90% of their, no, let's be honest here. 99.9% of their endeavor goes toward, understanding material nature because they want to enjoy it. And then since they pay lip service to Krishna, because they don't want to be exploitative jerks, but, so they want to feel good about themselves. Therefore, they say, okay, it's all coming from God, but, I'm going to enjoy it, right? So if you take that unbalanced approach, then clearly you don't have the sambandha, you're not doing the proper abhidheya, you won't reach that prayojana. You'll get your prayojana, which is to enjoy materially if you go through that, but it's not the ultimate goal. So Krishna is so kind that even when he's presenting Shastra to us, if we still have material attachments, he will allow us to continue being distracted. But if we are sincere, we will read these things and we'll understand actually what they mean, because the acharyas are also explaining it, just in case we have an idea of our own. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in this book, Śrī tattva-sutra, squashes so many, there's a whole bunch of them coming up, misconceptions of devotional service, that he was way ahead of his time. It's as if he saw the future of what people were going to use as excuses in the Shastras to try to not follow Shastra. And he addresses several of them in Śrī tattva-sutra. So we'll get to those in time. So it's so important for us to approach Shastra in the proper way, otherwise we will become distracted and we'll justify our desires. Like, I desire to enjoy materially, so when I read that, I'm going to say, well, you have to do both. And we'll call that a balance. You can't just be all spiritual, you have to, also address your material side. But that it's an unbalanced approach, and then, you don't get much out of Shastra when you approach it in that way. You get some because you're actually approaching Shastra, so you get that much credit. But if you're not doing it in the proper mood, you don't approach it to understand it, but if you're approaching it to try to justify your behaviors, then and then there's those other verses, I think it's 13 and 9 maybe, about how one result is given if you I think I have those too. I should just have the Śrī Īśopaniṣad. One result is obtained by culture of knowledge. Different result.
This is 9.
Is it 9? I have a lot of windows open now.
10.
Is it 10?
10 and 11.
The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of machines.
Right.
This is 10. Just
And
like
then-
Bhagavatam says, Srimad Bhagavatam describes the reality which is different from illusion for the benefit of.
Yeah. And then that's verse 2, right? 112. The highest truth. And then mantra 13 is, it is said that one result is obtained by worshipping the supreme cause of all causes, and that another result is obtained for worshipping that which is not supreme. All this is heard from the undisturbed authorities who clearly explain it. So we want to learn from the undisturbed authorities, and we should know that there's one result for actually following properly, and there's a completely different result if you want to cultivate that nescience.
And also parallel to this mantra 14 is mantra 11.
Mm-hmm.
Mantra 11 is parallel to this mantra 14.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, they basically have, I think it's like 3, and then they have 3 parallel ones just after that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that?
Yeah, just 2 things. One is that you mentioned just being averse, it's not to material sanctification, it is not goal. And I remember hearing from Scott Maharaj, he was explaining about this German philosopher Schopenhauer, who was very much averse to material world. And you could see his face, he's so sour, because he's he's appalled by everything. And apparently, he said that there are 2 types of people in this world. Avoid both of them. So he didn't like this material world. But this doesn't mean that he was very much spiritually elevated, because the mind, as we know, has 2 main functions: acceptance and rejection. Ichha, Boga and Tyaga. So most people are very much engrossed into Ichha. They like to enjoy. They like this world. But there are some people who are engrossed in the other extreme. So it's nothing special about it. It's a little better because in this situation, one could be more receptive to spiritual knowledge, to real spiritual knowledge, but not necessarily. Maybe not. We have example in Bhagavatam, Maharaja Chitraketu, when he experienced big turmoil, great suffering in his life, when his son was poisoned. Then sages came and they used this opportunity to preach, to give clear and transcendental knowledge. And he was receptive. But we have opposite example also, Daksha. He also was very mortified when Narada Muni preached to his sons to take sannyas. And Narada Muni tried to take advantage, to use this opportunity, but Daksha did not welcome it. So, not necessarily. So this one thing, and I'd like to mention. The second thing, I forgot. I elaborated on the first one too much. Anyway, don't remember. Maybe we'll come back.
Okay, Josh, let us know. Yeah, it's actually a sign of intelligence. If you're intelligent at all, you won't be satisfied in this material world. But that doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're spiritual. It just means that you have a little bit of intelligence. So if we learn how to properly apply that intelligence, then we're in good shape. Pandavaji mentioned maybe yesterday how these enemies have taken strategic posts throughout the body, and the senses, the mind, the intelligence, like that. And so we have to be diligent in training all of these things. So we train the senses by only accepting Krishna Prasad, etc. We train the intelligence by understanding Shastra through a bona fide spiritual master. And then if we train the intelligence in that way, the mind will follow. That's how you make the mind your friend. By constantly following the orders of the spiritual master and then accepting those things that are favorable, rejecting the things that are not favorable. So we shouldn't get lost in just understanding the externals. Like, okay, well, I'm averse to this material world, so I'm on a high platform. Not necessarily, right? So we don't focus on that. We focus on what the actual I lost that word too. What's the word when you can understand that it has the quality by the. There's that word there. I don't know. Yeah, you can understand that something is something because of
symptom.
Yeah. Anyway, I lost that word. But you know what I'm saying.
Substance or essence.
Substance, maybe.
Characteristic.
Yeah. Distinguishing quality. Anyway, whatever the.
Vishesha in Sanskrit. This is what distinguishes an object from everything else. It's a specific thing that only
Okay, so that's what Vishesha is. So we were talking about Nirvishesha and Savishesha before. So basically, yeah, we want to gauge by the actual unique attribute of what devotional service is, and that's whether we're actually becoming attached to Krishna, right? We can see where our attachment lies. Does it lie in serving the senses, and sense gratification, and things like that, comfort, convenience, entertainment for us? Or does it lie in serving Krishna, making sure that Krishna is happy and all that? So that's the determining factor. So we don't base or gauge our spiritual advancement by external things. They can help us to determine whether or not we're advancing, but they're not necessary qualifications. They're not necessarily spiritual. So Srimad Bhagavatam 5:18-12 says that all of the qualities of the saintly persons and the demigods automatically become manifest in someone who's practicing bhakti. But it doesn't mean that someone who has some of these qualities has bhakti. It could mean that they just have material quality. And so if we become confused by possessing some of these material qualities, and here's the kicker, even if we genuinely get them, we're engaging in bhakti properly, we're focused, and we start getting some of these qualities. As soon as we think, I have created or accumulated these qualities, then they're no longer good, they're no longer transcendental qualities. We think we're the doer. And so many times we actually then lose those qualities, or at least we lose access to them for some time until we again have the right consciousness. And this is a fairly common thing, because we engage in devotional service, we see the results happening, and then we may think that, oh, this is happening because of all the work that I've done, all the hard, tough work that I did in devotional service, right? But no, it's because we were serving Krishna properly, then we were given access to, some of these natural qualities, and are able to use them to serve him. But as soon as we think that they have anything to do with us, then we lose. So we can use these qualities as a litmus test to see if we're making advancement, if some of these qualities are building up or are accumulating in our character. But we shouldn't try to cultivate them outside of devotional service, independently. And we shouldn't automatically think that just because this is coming, then, I must be advancing in bhakti, if that's clear. Is that clear? Yeah.
Question regarding this. Some temples use sadhana sheets for measurement of kind of performance of devotees. So, and what's the proper use of these methods in this regard?
Well, just like anything, it can be used in a material way or a spiritual way. I've had sadhana sheets back in the day. Some people used to cheat on them. And so if you're cheating on it, then you're only seeing it as a material thing. The thing that we have to remember, very important thing that we have to remember about sadhana, is that it's important and it's necessary to have good, steady sadhana. Sometimes either we ourselves or someone else can negatively affect our sadhana by making us be too hard on ourselves. So if you miss Mangala Arati, for example, and then you wake up and your entire day is ruined because you're just focusing on the fact that, man, I'm the worst person ever, I miss Mangala Arati, then you're missing the point of what Mangala Arati is for. Mangala Arati is so that when you rise, preferably early in the morning, you start your day properly by properly bathing, properly decorating your body with tilak, understanding that you're a temple of Vishnu, going to see Krishna, glorifying the spiritual master, showing that appreciation, and then starting the day on that positive note so that throughout the rest of the day, you can serve Krishna in the best possible mindset. If it becomes something where when you miss it, your entire day is blown, then that's not good. In other words, you should feel bad enough to try not to miss it because it's important, but it shouldn't make you lose the whole point of why it's performed. So if you get up later, you still do all of these things. You still start your day cleansing yourself and properly decorating yourself and glorifying the spiritual master, and and trying to get off on the right foot. Because otherwise, if it becomes just that external thing, well, were you there or not, right? Because it's about the consciousness. Some people can easily get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, they just naturally, and they're there, but maybe mentally they're thinking about something else. Some people are still awake at that time, right? And their mind is most likely somewhere else, right? And others maybe have a tougher time waking up, but their mind's on Krishna. So we can't really judge it by whether or not you can check that box. But it is a good indicator, and Srila Prabhupada said the morning program is mandatory, so we should go. It's a balance. We have to understand why it's important, and then give that the emphasis, right? But if we give the emphasis of got to be here, and then if you get so many demerits, then you get kicked out of, I don't know, whatever they do these days. But do you want to add something to that, Panditji? I don't want to be too light on it. I feel like what I just said, maybe I was being too light on Mangalarti. I try to do it in a balanced way. It's very important, the morning program. But we shouldn't, if we miss it, we shouldn't be counterproductive about the whole thing, right? But then we also shouldn't become too lax and just have that our default, like, don't be so fanatical. And then every day you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning instead of, and then, but I mean, it is better if, technically, especially in the early stages, take that last part back. Because in the early stages, it's better to just, go and get up. At some point in our lives, if we can get up at 6 or 7 and actually focus, and then work toward getting up earlier every day until we actually can fit into that realm, that's better than beating yourself up about not being able to do it and then not doing any sort of morning program at all. If that makes sense. Yeah. Did that sound pretty balanced?
Yeah, sure. Yes, there is verse from Bhagavatam where Krishna says the devotee should never be morose.
Yeah.
Although he might not be able to follow everything and he might be defeated by sense gratification. But he should just continue with his service, never be morose, never be depressed. And my own experience, I can say all glories to the social pressure.
Yeah, because sometimes it's needed.
At least in my case, I'm very grateful that because of this social pressure, I was actually getting up for Mangalarti for many years until I kind of, first of all, get used to it. Now I wake up usually without alarm clock from around 3:30 or something. And not that I have now some spiritual taste, but now it's much more natural to get up early. But all glories to the pressure that the senior devotees they applied. I mean, of course, this pressure can also be counterproductive sometimes. In some cases, so one should be careful how this is applied.
If it's the right amount of pressure where you're inspired to continue and you feel just bad enough to want to do it right the next time, then it's okay. But if it totally blows up your whole system and then you completely lose all traction, and you think that, oh no, that's the gauge of Krishna consciousness, so I go or not, so I can be Krishna conscious.
Right.
You can't be Krishna conscious. So anything can be used properly and improperly. So sadhana sheets, I like them because it helps us keep track of what we're doing. But as far as, policy, it can get a bit tricky. I'm glad I'm not in management. That's all I have to say. But it's good because when I like keeping track of everything. When I'm studying,
Big brother.
I like to keep track of actually. So when I was unplugged for the year, and even before that, when I was studying through Bhagavatam too, I have calendars here that show exactly what chapters I was working on which days and how long the chapters took. Those kind of things are fun for me, and they keep me going, because then I can sort of see, okay, by this time, I might be able to get this in, but you can't be too attached to it, right? Sometimes you do even better than you thought, and sometimes you can't quite meet your goal, but it's sort of like, it keeps you encouraged and enthusiastic. So if sadhana sheets work for us like that, we should use them. If they do the opposite, like I remember one time in Vrindavan, we had the sadhana sheets for the VIHE, for Bhakti Shastri. And I felt so bad because I was using different pen colors for attending, being late, and not attending. And so the goal was, attending is all in black. The goal was that the whole thing is black. And if you're a little bit late, there's some blue. And if you miss it, then you have to put red. And so the worst thing in the world is if the whole thing is black except for one red mark. That's the worst thing. It doesn't feel as bad when there's like 5 or 6 red ones, but when it's only one, you just feel, oh, so close. So if it comes down to that, then maybe we're taking that a little too seriously.
But this goes back to this Niyamagata principle. You follow the rules just because of the rules.
Yeah.
Or not because of the spiritual benefit. Or you don't follow the rules just because you're whimsical. But from sound is important because this is the only way that we will attain ruchi. Taste. If we don't follow sadhana properly every day, then we won't attain attraction to this everyday routine. If you want to attain taste for something, you have to do this thing regularly every day. Otherwise, you don't ever get to start to like it. Therefore, prolonged periods of following sadhana are very conducive to developing taste. Like in our temple in Brooklyn, you just don't get to miss Mangalam. It's it. I twisted my ankle and I just could not walk for a while. So after a few days, I felt the social pressure. I mean, just get some I call this some bandage. I mean, this devotee, he also twisted his ankle. He put the bandage and he's so just do the same, just get real. So I felt little cornered, put in the corner, but I mean, in the long run, if you're dealing with mature people, like when you hit 50, you're supposed to be a little bit mature. Then you don't take this, you don't have grudge so much on this. No, this is the duty of these people. They are there to ensure that the temple functions as properly wanted and fit in. But the point is, unless there is a prolonged period, months, every day, following these rules, then it will be difficult to experience real taste. Like I know Bhanu Swami, sometimes they ask him, "Oh, Maharaj, such and such problem and this and that," and then he goes like, "Do you attend Mangalam?" And then people say, "No." Well, you see, you cannot. So you cannot ask why something doesn't work because you don't follow the prescription of the physician. He gave the prescription and medicine. You don't take the medicine. Why I'm still sick? And then I asked him once again, I asked him, so what is actually nishta? What is the level of nishta? It means nishta should mean that you are constantly engaged in devotional service, and that would mean exactly this following this sadhana without even somebody checking. And Maharaj said, yes, that means everyday following. If you're not established in everyday Prabhupada's sadhana, then you're not on Nishta. So if you're not on Nishta, then what to speak about Ruchi and Asakti? And another of my teachers, even once he said that Nishta means that in the waking hours, it means you have 6 hours for sleeping, and then these are 18 hours. These 18 hours, okay, you minus whatever takes time to take shower to eat, but this is also devotional service. So 18 hours you're engaged in direct devotional service. This is Nishta. And if this is the case, according to our Chair, then one lifetime you are on the fast track to go back home to God. In one lifetime. If you engage like 12 hours, then it may take 3 lifetimes. If you're just 6 hours indeed, well,
What can I get for 1 hour a day? What can I get for 5 minutes?
What's the minimum standard for going back home to God? The minimum standard. One sannyasi was joking. People always ask me, Maharaj, what's the minimum standard of deity worship at home? Golden time. What's the minimum standard? Do you ask you go to marriage counseling and ask, what's the minimum standard?
What's the least amount of work I could possibly do?
So that I can keep marriage together and my wife doesn't kick me out. You ask this, you're not supposed to ask these things.
No one asks what is the maximum.
Or at least, maybe not the maximum, at least decent amount. Okay, what's the decent amount? No, it's always the bare minimum. Okay, what's the bare minimum of how you can maintain the body and the soul together? Like that much rice every day?
Yeah, so
nobody asked this. But not going time. Okay, I think we exhausted this topic. That's enough of that.
Did that answer the question? Anything can be used properly or improperly. That's always the.
Oh, that was the discussion. The sandwich.
Yeah. That's how that started.
Okay.
So yeah, sadhana is very important. Sadhana sheet can be important, cannot be important, depending on how you use it. That's the synopsis of the Tulsi Prabhu. Yeah.
Maybe one point can be mentioned is that generally the idea of sadhana sheet or keeping like any way of tracking about our sadhana is rather when we see that we are making some advancement, it will encourage us to continue.
Yeah.
Tracking your sadhana is not to discourage yourself that, oh, yes, you see, I'm just failing again and again. No, rather the opposite. If we kind of write down our sadhana, generally we'll see that with the time we are making progress. And this will be encouraging. It can be a slow progress, but it's progress. So, okay, I'm improving. Let me continue. That's the idea.
Yeah.
To see that the process is working.
Yep, it's a science. So okay. So then we'll start chapter 2. Chit Padartha Prakarana, Spirit. Introduction to chapter 2 by Srila Bhakti-yoga Thakur. Here, someone may ask, to whom does the Supreme Personality of Godhead give mercy when he creates the material universes and performs other activities? Why does he give his mercy to these persons? Right? So at the end of chapter 1, we found out that the material world is created because of his mercy, compassion. And so now someone may ask, well, who is that compassion directed at? And why does he give it to those people? Continuing, to answer this question by showing that the Supreme Personality of Godhead creates material universes and performs many other activities in order to give mercy to the individual spirit souls, and also by showing, using all the Vedanta scriptures as evidence, the true nature of the independent spirit souls, the author of these sutras now begins this chapter, which gives an elaborate definition of the word chit, spirit. Sutra 11. Cetana paranugatas tad vidhi vashyatvat. The individual souls are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord and are subject to his rules. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments. Here the word Chaitanaha means conscious spirit souls. The plural is used here to indicate that the souls are many in number. The word paranugataha means that the souls are subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are under his control. This is so because they must obey his commands. This clear distinction between the Lord and the individual soul is proclaimed in Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Mantra 8. Quote, such a person must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminated, the self-sufficient philosopher who has been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad Mantra 16, the living entities are also differentiated expansions of the Lord's self, and because some of them desire to be lords and imitate the Supreme Lord, he allows them to enter into the cosmic creation with the option to fully utilize their propensity to lord it over nature. Because of the presence of his parts and parcels, the living entities, the entire phenomenal world is stirred into action and reaction. Thus, the living entities are given full facilities to lord it over material nature, but the ultimate controller is the Lord himself in his plenary feature as Paramatma, the super soul, who is one of the Purushas. Thus, there is a gulf of difference between the living entity, Atma, and the controlling Lord, Paramatma, the soul and the super soul. Paramatma is the controller, and the Atma is the controlled. Therefore, they are in different categories. Because the Paramatma fully cooperates with the Atma, he is known as the constant companion of the living being. In the Bhagavad Gita 1861, it is said, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wandering of all living entities. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verses 5 and 6, the Supreme Personality of Godhead says, besides this inferior nature, O Arjuna, there is a superior nature of mine, which are all the living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both its origin and dissolution. In the Upanishads, it is said, O Sveta-ketu, you are that. So tattva-asi. In Srila Madhvacharya's Tattva-muktavali, text 6, it is said, the Mayavadi commentator on the Vedanta claims that the words tattvam-asi are the Mahavakya, the most important statement of the Vedas. According to his explanation, tat means the supreme, tvam means you, and asi means are. So you are the supreme. What do you think about that?
Yeah,
Sounds pretty good, right? I'll buy that.
I always knew.
Yeah. He interpreted the words to mean you are the supreme, and he claimed that there is no difference between the supreme and individual spirit souls. The Vaishnava commentator on Vedanta, so we had the Mayavadi commentator, let's hear what the Vaishnava commentator has to say, interpreted these words in a different way, saying that tattvam is a possessive compound word, shashti tat-purusha samasa. According to his explanation, tat means of the Supreme, and the entire sentence means you are the servant of the Supreme. In this way, the proper meaning of the scriptural statement is clearly shown. It also makes more sense. We covered that in the previous chapter, and also in the Bhagavad Gita thematic, that if the Supreme Lord, if the living entity and the Supreme Lord were equal, you can't be divided. And so how would he become illusion in this material world? It doesn't make any sense. The following sutra, 12, answers the question whether the jiva is eternal or not eternal. Sutra 12. Te chanadyananta parashakti visheshatvat. The jivas have neither beginning nor end, for they are parts and parcels of the jiva potency of the Lord. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments, the jivas can be called either eternal or non-eternal. They are eternal because they are generated by the Lord's potency, which is beginningless and endless. But they can be called non-eternal because the Lord can destroy them at any time. In the Bhagavad Gita, 15:7 and 7, verses 5 and 6, the Supreme Personality of Godhead declares, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Besides this inferior nature, O Arjuna, there is a superior nature of mind, which are all the living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe. Then in the Tattva-Upanishad 1:2-18, it is said, and this is very much like a Bhagavad Gita verse, let me know if you know the particular one. For the soul there is neither birth nor death, nor having once been does he ever cease to be. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, undying, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Jayate mriyate vakadachin nayan babavate vanabuya. Ajo nitya shashtrayam purano nanyate anyamane sharire. So the Kata Upanishad one is slightly different than that, but that's Bhagavad Gita 2:20. Although the jivas are transcendental, they are not identical with the Supreme Lord, who is the super-transcendental entity. This is shown in the next sutra. Chid ananda svarupa api parato vinna nitya satyabhavat. Although they are spiritual and blissful, the individual spirit souls are different from the Supreme. For it is not inevitable that they are always situated in this spiritual reality. So it's said before that the jivas as tatashta shakti, they can, if they misuse their free will, they can be influenced by material nature. But as soon as they redirect the consciousness, they're then again back in the spiritual world. Krishna doesn't have this problem. He can't, he has the supreme consciousness, so his consciousness doesn't become polluted. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments, the Lord and the Jiva have a similar nature in the sense that they are both Chid Ananda Swarupa, but the Lord is immutable and the Jiva originates from the transformation of Jiva Shakti, the Lord. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to mantra 7 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad, in this mantra, the words ekatvam anupasyataha indicate that one should see the unity of all living entities from the viewpoint of the revealed scriptures. So evidently we're not just supposed to use our whim or our personal experience or our logic. We're supposed to understand them through the revealed scriptures. The individual sparks of the Supreme Whole, the Lord, possesses almost 80% of the known qualities of the whole, but they are not quantitatively equal to the Supreme Lord. These qualities are present in minute quantity, for the living entity is but a minute part and parcel of the Supreme Whole. To use another example, the quantity of salt present in a drop is never comparable to the quantity of salt present in the complete ocean. But the salt present in the drop is qualitatively equal in chemical composition to all the salt present in the ocean. If the individual living being were equal to the Supreme Lord, both qualitatively and quantitatively, there would be no question of his being under the influence of material energy. In the previous mantras, it has already been discussed that no living being, not even the powerful demigods, can surpass the Supreme Being in any respects. Therefore, ekatvam does not mean that a living being is equal in all respects to the Supreme Lord. It does, however, indicate that in a broader sense, there is one interest, just as in the family, the interest of all members is one. I gave the example yesterday of my father's family, him and his brothers, and their interest was all one. If one of them was getting into a fight, all the others would join the fight. It's not the purified version of that, but it's, this is the example. Or in a nation, the national interest is one.
Krishna said about the Pandavas, if someone is the enemy of the Pandavas, he's my enemy.
Yeah.
And if he's friend of the Pandavas, he's my friend.
Yeah. That's the purified version. My dad's family was the reflection of the purified version. Yeah. Because most of the time, whoever was in the fight actually deserved to be in it. Yeah. So it's the principle is there, but it becomes perverted. Although there are many different individuals, that's the national interest. Since the living entities are all members of the same Supreme Family, their interest and that of the Supreme Being are not different. That's why it's so important for us to understand what is the Supreme Lord's policies, what are his interests. Because if we're supposed to reflect those interests, we have to know what they are. Right? So we have to become representatives. The word representative it's a great word because represent implies that something was already presented to you and now you're re-presenting it, right? So it's presented to us through our spiritual master and then we represent it to others by our behaviors, by our words, by our actions.
Yet this is very interesting because the imperfect senses, because the ignorance, mistake, while something is presented to us, Shabda, if we are distracted by something, we don't listen, then when we try to present in our turn, then this is cheating because we don't present it properly. So it's a misrepresentation. It's somebody misrepresents his position because he was not unattentive while it was the truth was presented to him.
Yeah.
It had something to do with the four defects of the condition. So one of them is just
Imperfect senses, tendency to cheat, commits mistakes, and under illusion. Every living being is the son of the Supreme Being, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 7.5. All living creatures throughout this universe, including birds, reptiles, ants, aquatics, trees, and so on, are emanations of the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, all of them belong to the family of the Supreme Being. There is no clash of interest. In the next two sutras, the author describes the idea that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the individual spirit souls are both one and different simultaneously. Are there any questions up to this point? Yes.
Prabhu, it was mentioned there that actually Lord can destroy any of living beings.
He sure can.
Yeah, but it was said
But he doesn't.
that we're eternal and we can be destroyed, right? In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita.
Right. We can't be destroyed by material weapons. We can't be burned by material fire. We can't be moistened by material water. We can't be withered by material wind. Because spirit is transcendental to matter. But if Krishna wanted to, he could do anything he wants. He could, but he doesn't.
I believe like there was some statement that soul in general can be destroyed ever. That there was no beginning to the soul and there will be no end. No?
Yeah. As far as I understand, he's just pointing out that he can't, because Krishna can do anything, right?
You know, like, it's funny, but I think many people, probably most of the devotees, have experienced that moment when they think, oh my God, Krishna, just please destroy me, I don't want to exist. No, you can go to Brahman, but it's temporary, so you don't even account that Krishna, just destroy me, you're God, you can do anything. And you can hear sometimes from devotees that, well, soul can be destroyed and you're always eternal, but it's pointed out here that actually can be destroyed.
Yeah, he knows better than we do. So when we make a prayer like that, he doesn't yeah.
I don't want to be destroyed by Krishna.
Yeah.
I want to be with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't see that statement often. But you know, Krishna can do anything, but he doesn't.
He can also create a feeling in the living entity, in the soul that is destroyed, although in actuality it's not destroyed.
Sure, he could do anything.
Like in, I think, the Caru to describe that when Vishnudutas were like a Harinam party, were going from the spiritual world to material and the other way around. They were seeing many like sages, personalists who are actually sitting and they are meditating and they are thinking that they don't exist anymore, but actually they were seeing them as personalities.
Oh, so from their point of view, they weren't experiencing what everyone else was. Yeah.
He can create this illusion if the living entity wants this. If the living entity says, Krishna, destroy me, I don't want to exist anymore. Okay, you are destroyed, but actually still individuality.
Yeah. Because as we pointed out yesterday, when we misuse our free will and say that we want to be independent from Krishna or separate from Krishna, that's the only actual option. If you want to be separate from Krishna, that means you don't exist. But he doesn't do that. He expands this world out of compassion so that we can act as if we're independent from him for however long it takes. We've been doing it since time immemorial. Yeah.
But he also designed this material world, so it's not too comfortable for us, so we can quickly come back to spiritual world. But at the same time, it eliminates the idea of non-existence. Like says that he creates this world so we can exist without him, but he also creates that ways that we will suffer here a lot. And that's not.
We actually create our suffering.
Yeah, but this world is designed to give us suffering.
This world is designed according to our specifications. Right? So the spiritual world is perfect. Everything works properly. Everything's centered around Krishna, so everything is harmonic. Everything is in harmony. Everything goes very swell. Here in the material world, you have a whole bunch of living entities thinking that they are the center. So there's all sorts of conflicts, right? You ever do the experiment with you put a whole bunch of dots on the paper, you draw a circle around each one, and you see that they're all overlapping. And these represent conflicts in the material world. But if you take that same piece of paper with the same amount of dots on it, you put one Krishna dot in the center, and they all go around it, it's all harmonic, right? Like ripples in a pond. So this suffering is here because of us, not because of Krishna.
Yeah, but why would we want to go away from Krishna? Because we don't want him to be in the center.
Good question.
Yeah, because we don't want him to be in the center.
Yeah, because we think we can be the center.
Or no, there there is pravritya and nirvritya. We can want to be in the center, or we just may want to Krishna not be in the center. There are two options. So if someone just doesn't want anyone to be in the center, I mean, he first wants himself to be in the center, but soon he realizes that it's not impossible, and that he can think, if I can be in the center, then no one should.
So no one should. So then no one's in the center. What does that look like?
No one exists. Nothing.
Non-existence.
yeah. So technically, Buddhism is not like even such a mess, because Krishna can do that. He can annihilate us.
He could, but he doesn't. As far as I know, I don't know of any instance where he actually did, but he could. Can you think of anything? We actually have to end now because I have another class that starts in 5 minutes. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada ki jai. Bhakti-yoga Thakur ki jai. Śrī Tattva-sutra ki jai.